An older man pays for the groceries of a mother with 4 children, only to be shocked when she shows him a photo. The face in the picture? It's his. How is that possible? What could this simple photo reveal about their past? Before we dive into this heartwarming story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It helps us bring more inspiring stories like this one to you. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Marina stood at the checkout line, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. A routine grocery run had taken a sharp turn when she realized her wallet was lighter than expected. It wasn't just an embarrassing moment, it was a painful reminder of her reality. Since her husband Arthur's death, things had spiraled financially. Bills? They seemed to multiply overnight. She shuffled nervously, trying to hide her panic as she counted and recounted the money in her hand. "It's just a few dollars short," she whispered, hoping the cashier might overlook the small difference. But there was no sympathy from the cashier, just an impatient sigh as the line of customers behind her grew longer. The air in the supermarket seemed to thicken with every passing second. Behind Marina, people shifted restlessly, their impatience palpable. A few whispered under their breath, and one customer even checked their watch dramatically. In these moments, it's easy to feel small, almost invisible. But Marina wasn't invisible to everyone. An elderly man, standing a few places behind her, had been watching the situation unfold. His name was Victor, a quiet observer who couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to step in. "Excuse me," he said, stepping forward. "I've got it." His voice was gentle but firm, offering the lifeline Marina didn't expect. At first, Marina hesitated. Accepting help didn't come easily, especially from a stranger. Pride and necessity battled within her. She looked at him, her eyes wide with both gratitude and embarrassment. "You really don't have to," she began, her voice soft, almost pleading. But Victor simply smiled. "We've all been there," he replied, his tone making it clear that this wasn't about pity, just one human helping another. Marina, her cheeks flushing, finally nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It wasn't just the money, it was the kindness in the face of her struggle that left a mark. The mood in the store shifted in an instant. Those who had been grumbling behind her now fell silent, perhaps a little ashamed of their impatience. As the groceries were bagged and paid for, Marina's mind raced. How often had she tried to stretch every dollar, wondering if she could make it to the end of the month? And here was this stranger, offering help without hesitation. It felt like a small miracle, a moment of light in what had been a very dark time. "Why?" she thought, but she didn't have the courage to ask. Instead, she took a deep breath, knowing she would carry this kindness with her long after she left the store. Victor didn't linger for praise or recognition. He simply nodded, as if to say, "No need to thank me." Marina couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man's generosity, though. There was something about him, something almost familiar, yet distant. She watched him as he moved toward the store manager, exchanging a few quiet words. It was a fleeting moment, but one that would soon unravel into something much bigger than either of them expected. The real story, as it turned out, was just beginning to unfold. As Marina left the store, groceries in hand and gratitude heavy in her heart, she couldn't shake the image of Victor from her mind. Something about him stood out, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She glanced back one more time and saw him speaking to the store manager with a certain familiarity that caught her off guard. Curiosity piqued. She lingered a moment longer, pretending to adjust her shopping bags as she listened in on their conversation. And that's when it hit her, a revelation that left her frozen in place. The man who had so generously stepped in to help her wasn't just another kind stranger. He was the owner of the entire supermarket chain. The news hit Marina like a tidal wave, almost knocking the wind out of her. She had never imagined that the man who quietly handed over a few bills to save her from embarrassment was, in fact, the very person who owned the store she stood in. Victor, she whispered to herself, as if saying his name again would somehow make it more real. And yet, it didn't change the kindness of his gesture. If anything, it deepened her appreciation. This wasn't just a rich man throwing money around. No, it was an act of genuine empathy, something that money could never buy. Marina's thoughts raced as she walked to her car. What were the odds? Of all the people in that bustling supermarket, it was Victor who had come to her rescue. And while his wealth might have made it easier for him to help, it didn't feel transactional. It felt personal. She couldn't help but wonder what had moved him to act. Most people in his position wouldn't have even noticed someone like her, much less stepped forward to offer assistance. And yet, here he was, defying every expectation she had of someone in his shoes. As she loaded her groceries into the car, Marina's mind kept circling back to that moment. The shock of discovering Victor's true identity made her reflect on how often we judge people by their appearances or their actions without really knowing their stories. How many others had crossed her path, quietly offering help or kindness without her ever knowing the full scope of who they were? Victor's gesture reminded her that sometimes people are much more than they seem, especially when they act from the heart rather than the pocketbook. Driving away from the store, Marina couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of their story. There was something unfinished about their encounter, a sense that this seemingly small act of kindness would ripple into something far greater. What she didn't know, however, was just how deep those ripples would go, and how closely their lives were already intertwined. But the clues were there, just waiting to be uncovered. Outside the supermarket, the weight of the day caught up with Marina. She leaned against her car, taking a moment to compose herself, but the flood of emotions was hard to hold back. Something about the kindness Victor had shown stirred memories she had tried so hard to suppress. She reached into her purse, pulling out a worn, faded photo of Arthur, her late husband. His face, full of life and love, smiled back at her, and a familiar ache settled in her chest. It had been 2 long, exhausting years since the accident that took him from her and their 4 children. Not a day went by when she didn't think about how different life had become without him. As Victor left the store and crossed the parking lot, Marina felt compelled to share her story. She approached him, her voice soft but steady. "I want to thank you again for your kindness," she began. "You have no idea what it means to me." Victor smiled warmly, but before he could reply, Marina continued, her words carrying a depth of pain. "This," she said, holding up the photo of Arthur, "is my husband. He passed away 2 years ago. Since then, it's just been me and my kids, trying to hold it together." There was a moment of silence, and then she added, "He was the only one providing for us. And after the accident, I've been doing everything I can, but it's never enough." Victor looked at the picture, his face softening as he listened. There was something in the way Marina spoke, her strength mingled with vulnerability, that pulled him in. He could see the weight she carried, not just as a mother trying to make ends meet, but as a woman who had lost her partner, her anchor. "I can't even imagine how hard that must be," Victor said gently, his voice laced with empathy. Marina nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "It's the kids," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I just want them to have a good life, you know? To not feel the emptiness, the struggle." Marina's words hung in the air, and Victor could feel the depth of her heartache. It wasn't just about the money or the groceries. It was about the life she had lost, and the impossible task of rebuilding it on her own. "You've been through a lot," Victor said, his tone warm but serious. "But you're still here, still fighting. That says more about you than you realize." Marina offered a sad smile. "I don't feel strong most days," she admitted. "It's hard to feel anything but tired." Victor nodded, understanding more than she knew. The struggle to survive, to keep going when the world feels like it's falling apart, that was a battle he recognized all too well. As their conversation drew to a close, There was an undeniable connection between them. Marina had shared something deeply personal, and Victor had listened without judgment. But something lingered in Victor's mind. Something about Arthur's name, about his face in that photo. It was a fleeting thought, but it tugged at the edges of his memory. He couldn't quite place it, but there was something familiar about it all, something he needed to remember. Yet, for now, he pushed it aside, not knowing that this moment would soon unravel into a revelation neither of them saw coming. As Victor walked away, something gnawed at him. There was something about Arthur, his name, his face, that felt familiar, tugging at the edges of a memory long buried. He tried to shake it off, but the feeling persisted, making him feel unsettled. After all, life has a funny way of bringing old secrets back to the surface when you least expect it. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that this wasn't just coincidence. He had to know more. But how could he approach Marina with his suspicions? There was no easy way to ask someone about a past they might not even be aware of. Later that evening, Victor found himself alone with his thoughts, sifting through memories from decades ago. It was a time he hadn't revisited in years, when he was younger, freer, and living a very different life. He remembered Cecilia, a beautiful and enigmatic woman he'd once been deeply involved with. They had shared something brief but intense, and then, just as quickly as she had entered his life, she vanished. No explanation, no goodbyes, just gone. But now, seeing Arthur's picture and hearing his last name, Rivera, stirred something deep in Victor's heart. Could it be? Could Arthur have been his son? Victor's mind raced back to those days. He remembered how Cecilia had been married, though her husband couldn't have children. It was no secret that their marriage was strained because of that. Looking back now, it all started to click into place. Could she have used their affair to conceive a child, Arthur, and passed him off as her husband's? The possibility sent a chill down Victor's spine. If this was true, he had a son out there. Had a son, he corrected himself, feeling a deep sadness settle in. Arthur was gone now, and that realization hit harder than he expected. The more Victor thought about it, the more he needed to know the truth. He couldn't live with the uncertainty gnawing at him any longer. If Arthur was his son, then that meant Marina and her children were his family. His only living connection to a past he didn't even know he had. But how could he approach her with this? She was already carrying so much on her shoulders. He didn't want to add more confusion or pain to her life. But he couldn't ignore this growing suspicion either. Victor decided he needed answers, but they weren't going to come easily. He made a decision that night. He would look into Arthur's background, find out the truth once and for all. It wouldn't be simple, and it certainly wouldn't be painless. But something told him this was a chapter of his life he couldn't leave unread. Little did he know, the revelations waiting for him would not only change his life, but would forever alter Marina's as well. Victor couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of discovering something life-altering. The clues all pointed in one direction, but he needed proof. So, without wasting any more time, he hired a private investigator, someone skilled at uncovering the hidden truths that life often buries deep. This wasn't just about satisfying his curiosity anymore. This was about filling a void that had lingered in his heart for decades. The investigator's task? Dig into Arthur's background, uncover his roots, and find out if Victor's suspicions were grounded in reality. It felt surreal, like a plot from a movie, but the stakes were all too real for Victor. Days passed, and with each one, Victor's anticipation grew. He kept playing scenarios in his head. What if he had known? What if he had been there for Arthur as a father? Those thoughts haunted him. One afternoon, the investigator called. "I have something you're going to want to hear," the voice on the other end said, sounding almost as surprised as Victor felt. When the investigator laid out the facts, everything Victor had feared and hoped was confirmed. Arthur was indeed his biological son, born from the brief but passionate relationship he had shared with Cecilia all those years ago. The realization hit Victor like a tidal wave. He sat in silence, absorbing the weight of what he had just learned. The son he never knew he had was gone, lost in a tragic accident before Victor even had the chance to meet him. His mind swirled with emotions, grief, regret, and an overwhelming sense of loss for the time they would never share. But more than that, there was a deep longing to somehow make things right. Marina and her children were all that remained of Arthur, and suddenly, they weren't just strangers in need of help. They were family. Victor's thoughts turned back to Marina. She had opened up to him about her struggles, and now he knew the deeper connection they shared. But how could he break this news to her? How could he tell her that her late husband, the father of her children, was his son? It was a delicate truth, one that could either bring them closer or create even more confusion and pain. Victor knew he had to approach the situation with care. Marina was already dealing with so much. Would this revelation offer her any sense of comfort? Or would it be another burden? The investigator's work was done, but Victor's next move weighed heavily on him. He didn't want to disrupt Marina's life more than it already had been, but at the same time, he couldn't ignore the truth. He decided that he would tell her. Marina had the right to know, and perhaps, in the sharing of this truth, they could both find a sense of closure, or even the beginning of something new. But there was no rushing this conversation. Victor would take his time, find the right moment, and hope that this unexpected truth would bring them together, rather than push them apart. The day Victor decided to meet with Marina and share the truth about Arthur, he felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve. How do you tell someone that the person they loved, the person they lost, was connected to you in such an unexpected way? When they finally met at a quiet park near Marina's home, Victor's face carried the weight of the news he was about to deliver. He gently explained what the investigator had uncovered, watching the shock wash over Marina as she absorbed the revelation. "Arthur was my son," Victor said, his voice quiet but steady. "I didn't know until now, but that makes your children my grandchildren." Marina's reaction wasn't what Victor expected. Instead of anger or disbelief, there was a deep, quiet understanding in her eyes. She wasn't the type to dwell on bitterness or accusations. "So," she whispered, still processing, "you didn't know? All these years, you didn't know?" Victor shook his head, regret evident in his expression. "I wish I had. If I had known, things could have been different. I could have been there for him, for you, for the kids." His words hung in the air, heavy with what-ifs. But Marina wasn't looking for blame. Life had already dealt her enough. What struck Marina most wasn't the revelation itself, but the fact that, like her, Victor had also been kept in the dark, missing out on a relationship that could have changed everything. "We're both victims of secrets," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of sorrow and empathy. She looked at him, and for the first time, saw a man carrying his own burdens of loss. Victor had not only lost a son, but had also missed out on an entire lifetime with him. It was a pain she could understand all too well. In that moment, they weren't strangers tied together by fate. They were two people trying to heal from a past they couldn't change. Victor, with his newfound sense of responsibility, made a decision that felt as natural as it was unexpected. He looked at Marina, eyes soft but resolute. "I want to help," he said. "Not just with the money, but with everything. I want to be here for you and the kids, however I can." Marina, who had spent the past 2 years feeling like she was shouldering the world alone, felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't just the financial support Victor was offering. It was the promise of stability, of family, of a new connection that went beyond her wildest hopes. And so, a new chapter began. Victor became a constant in Marina's life, not out of obligation, but out of love for the family he never knew he had. He stepped into the role of grandfather with ease, filling a gap that had been painfully empty since Arthur's passing. The children, once wary of this new figure in their lives, soon warmed to him, sensing the genuine care he had for them. For Marina, this bond with Victor, allowed her to breathe again, to focus on her children and their future without the crushing weight of financial worry. In many ways, Victor's presence was a second chance, a chance for them both to heal, together. With Victor's presence now woven into their daily lives, Marina and her children began to experience a kind of relief they hadn't felt in years. Gone were the constant fears about whether they could afford the next meal or keep the lights on. Instead, their home became a place of hope, laughter, and renewal. Victor, with his quiet strength, didn't just offer financial stability. He brought a sense of security, love, and belonging that had been missing since Arthur's tragic death. For Marina, it felt like a new beginning, one that she had almost given up on believing was possible. Victor, too, found himself transformed. He had spent so many years building an empire, accumulating wealth and success, yet something had always felt incomplete. Now, in the most unexpected of ways, he had found the family he never knew he was missing. His connection with Marina and the children wasn't just about filling a void. It was about creating something lasting. Every moment spent with them was a reminder that life, even when marked by loss, still held the capacity for joy and meaning. As he played the role of a grandfather, Victor found a sense of purpose that no business deal or financial success could ever offer. Marina watched in amazement as her children bonded with Victor, their laughter filling the house as he told them stories of his life and adventures. "He's like a superhero," her youngest once declared, eyes wide with admiration. Marina smiled, realizing how true that was in many ways. Victor had swooped into their lives when they needed him most, offering not just a financial lifeline, but the kind of love and stability that can only come from family. Together, they weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. And in that thriving, Marina began to see a future that once seemed impossible. As the months passed, Victor's role in their lives solidified, and the bond between them deepened. The children had a new sense of stability, a new figure to look up to. And Marina? She had a partner, not in the romantic sense, but in the way that truly matters. She no longer felt like she was carrying the world on her shoulders alone. Victor's presence allowed her to dream again, to think about the possibilities for her children's future without the shadow of financial worry constantly looming over her. Together, Marina and Victor began to lay the foundation for a new legacy. It wasn't about money or wealth, though those things certainly helped. It was about family, about the power of love, connection, and second chances. They had both lost so much, but in finding each other, they had gained something far more valuable. A new chapter had begun, and with it, a new legacy that would carry on long after they were gone, built on the strength of their shared love and resilience. Morale of the story: life has surprising ways of connecting us, and sometimes a simple act of kindness can change everything. Have you ever imagined discovering such a deep connection with a stranger? Stories like this make us reflect on the twists and turns of fate. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this video from? Leave your comment below and share your story of unexpected reunions or acts of kindness. This story reminds us that the past isn't always buried, and sometimes the greatest gift we can receive is the chance to right wrongs we didn't even know we had made. Have you ever experienced an unexpected twist like this? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to click on the next video to hear more surprising stories like this. And hit the notification bell so you never miss more heartwarming content.